Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the Local Logic May Masterclass. I'm going to introduce our panelists. Kevin, I'm going to you first. Please introduce yourself and your.
Hi, Kevin Green. I am the Senior Vice President and General Manager for the Real Estate Solutions Division here at Cotality.
James, you've been on my masterclass a few times. I'm grateful every time. Please tell those people who may not know who you are. There aren't going to be a lot of them, but maybe one or two.
James Twiggins, co-CEO of Next Home and Raise. You probably know me because I'm 6'7". I think I'm the tallest person in residential real estate.
All right, Emily, on that note, to you.
Emily Gerard, I'm the CEO at Unlock MLS and the Austin Board of Realtors here in Austin, Texas.
So the topic is one you may not have heard a lot about. It is the topic of the listing war, PLN, CCP, and the battle to own consumer attention. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about a little bit of background. Maybe, Emily, you don't mind if I point to you a little bit. What was CCP doing before? What are they doing now? What is the point of the whole thing with the PLNs, just based on your experience as an MLS?
If I'm to state where everybody is now, we're figuring out how to respond to the delayed marketing exempt listing requirements for NAR as they've been released. We're evaluating if there are different ways to consider CCP in the context of that policy, perhaps, and then trying not to get into the pissing match of the industry where everybody's in their respective corners, managing their positions on this issue and still finding a way forward that treats everybody relatively equitably. Or at least that's what I'm trying to do. And I think that's a hard thing to do right now. It's hard for brokers to navigate how to respond to the competition in the market. It's hard for portals to figure out how to navigate all of these different positions. And it's really hard for MLSs to navigate maintaining equity in the conversation in terms of how we treat everyone and how we manage within the given both legal construct, the policy construct that NAR has passed down, and then just the day-to-day politics of our respective marketplaces.
Yeah, and it's gotten to a point where everybody has skin in the game. It's disingenuous to say otherwise, right? I am a big believer in the MLS, but the MLSs need to continue to show value as as a database. Brokers are often out for dual agency that's more profitable for them. So we all talk about the consumer, but at the end of the day, to some degree, yes, we want to serve the consumer, but we are trying to do what's best. How do you guys feel in terms of your position, in terms of the changes? How do you interpret the changes?
Cotality, formerly known as CoreLogic, we provide the Matrix database in 25 of the 30 NFL cities in the U.S. So we have a lot of large markets, and that also means there's a lot of different rules that are out there. Each market is very different and serving the needs of their brokers and agents a little bit differently. And so we look at it from a technology standpoint of having an individual platform that can meet those needs. The goal is having a good database that's good for the consumer, it's good for brokers, it's good for agents to be able to have all of that history and rich data and being able to have it. But more importantly, being able to segment that via user class or who is accessing that and being able to have access to that data and or sending it to whatever platforms that they need to from a big broker standpoint, their CRMs, their different platforms that they need, back office products. The way we see it is you still want to have the same platform and the same database where it all is, but make sure that who has access to that data can be different depending on the rules of each individual market.
So let me go to you, James, because I am going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. Why are we even talking about this now, James? Like, why is it different? Some percentage of listings have always been like what we used to call them off market. Well, off market used to be sold data. Exclusives. Emily, what does NEML stand for?
Delayed marketing exempt listing.
Why are we doing this now? Why?
Well, first of all, you're right. There has always been some small percentage of sellers who had a need to keep their property off the open market. It could be privacy, it could be lots of reasons, but that percentage typically in the United States has been less than 1% who actually need something like that. And the MLS, at least NAR governed MLSs, have all come up with ways to create those privacy needs for people who want that. You can have the address not displayed. Candidly removes all the issues about privacy at that point because you need to work through the agent to figure out how to get into that property and all the details of it. So it's not essentially as searchable as it would be when the address is shown. This is really about 100% about greed. The end. You have a limited amount of inventory in the United States. We're at 4 million roughly units being sold. It's about companies that are wanting to increase the double ending of deals, use inventory to hold it to recruit under the guise of seller choice. And I don't have a problem with seller choice. I have a problem with seller truth. And that's the fundamental issue of what's going on here. There's no logical, normal conversation about how a company could be putting 48% of sellers into an off MLS status if it's not steering somebody in a direction. The end. There's no mathematical, logical conversation on planet Earth where a majority of sellers think that keeping their property off the greatest marketplace ever developed in the history of residential real estate on Earth is actually going to benefit them unless they're being steered into a specific direction. I don't care. A single economist would disagree with me on that statement.
A lot of the people who are screaming over this do actually have PLNs, whether it's through their CRM or whatever.
I get frustrated in this conversation because it's become so black and white. And I think a state like Texas, being a non-disclosure state, provides a different layer of context that matters. So what I have in my market is a real, true consumer sensitivity to the MLS system. Their perception is that because sold data is held in the MLS system, and there's the ability potentially for an appraisal district who appraises your property and assesses real property tax, which is the largest tax burden of any household in Texas because we have no income tax, that there is this potential that you might be taxed in a way that is excessive or beyond what you could be taxed otherwise if the sales price was not in the MLS. So what I have is consumers who do actually have a fear of the MLS. They don't see it for what it is. They don't always see it for the marketplace that can provide them the highest and best value for their dollar and the highest and best value for their investment. And I think that's true perhaps of the other handful of non-disclosure states in the country, which go unrecognized in this conversation because we've made it about this one set of competition as opposed to all of the other nuanced things that happen in local marketplaces. And I think it is important that while I can't speak on behalf of every consumer, I can tell you that the prevailing concern here in this marketplace is that they sometimes don't understand the way the MLS works. That's our challenge to overcome in partnership with the agents on the ground, and that they have a real sensitivity that is not always driven by one brokerage's business practice or model. And so I think it is important to remember that markets like that exist.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, look, I think it used to be so simple. I think consumers, even if they knew there was an option to sell off separately, they would try. Sometimes people do it just because it's easier. They have reasons. They're willing to take a little less money. So I feel like this is always around. Brokers always had the ability to send a listing around through their CRM or whatever. But, if it falls out, they go to the MLS, right? The difference, Kevin, of what's happening now is that it's just more public. Everything is just more exposed. Like we're just exposing something that's happened more regularly. Because from a vendor standpoint, do you feel like because this conversation is so visible now that portals and vendors and prop techs and all of us are being forced to take a stand or do like what some of the large MLS has done, which is say that NAR, this was already there all along, so we don't have to make any changes?
No, I mean, I think that's trying to wrap a bow around all of it is hard. I mean, that's the reason why we have local markets. Each market is very, very different. The interesting thing that I see though is as James quite eloquently put, we are the envy of the rest of the world. I get calls all the time as a vendor wanting to provide technology and a database. The actual MLS is the rules and regulations of what actually goes on. From a technology standpoint, we can serve and we can and do any of the types of rules and things that people want to throw at us, whether it is a private listing network, whether it is coming soon or the new demo, those things we can serve and be able to manage. It's the rules of that going in. And it depends on who are the constituents that want there and what agenda that they're trying to push through. I think having a database that has all that information that empowers the real estate professional, which then in turn empowers the consumer to make right choices, is the right thing to do.
I don't think anybody's arguing that it shouldn't be an MLS, right? I think it's a question of timing. There's been a lot of confusion. The policy is that the MLS decides now, right? It used to be 24 hours. And now I thought it was up to the MLS to decide now at what point the rule is that it has to go in, right?
I think it still is. Kevin thinks maybe it's not, but therein lies an issue, right? Mandate from above with very little detail to support the actual implementation of these policies and a wide variety of understanding of what they all mean, not to mention the counsel that sits on my shoulder, my legal counsel, who will also weigh in on the risk I carry as I go to implement the policies that are required of us. So it's very complex. It is not black and white.
Yeah, and it seems like you mentioned like NAR is swayed.
NAR
And
uses their ability to interpret their very vague policy to accommodate the variety of opinions that live in the industry.
Well, NAR is, look, I've been supportive when they're making the right calls, and I'm not afraid to tell them otherwise. This is a crappy policy. It is pushing all liability down to the MLSs. This policy has not been thought through. It was haphazardly thrown out. Horrible comms to get it out there. They didn't even think about the tech implications, which Emily knows about. Like, I've talked to MLSs that don't realize that demo status listings have to be in a VOW feed. They're like, oh, we're going to remove it from the VOW feed. But my point is, like, okay, well, as a franchisor with 630 locations across the US, I'm in 230 MLSs. I have to move everything to VOW feeds. Some of those MLSs are so small they don't even have VOW feeds, and they haven't thought through any of it. So this overlaps with coming soon policies and lots of MLSs. CRMLS was just like, yeah, we're not implementing it. And so now last week NAR is like, oh, it's optional to do demo, which, by the way, now it's a completely optional thing for MLSs to incorporate. Your question was, CCP rules are still the same, Audrey, of 24 hours if you're going to publicly market a home. It's the demo status that's allowed. The MLSs can interpret the time frame on it. And what I'm hearing, because I'm around most of the major MLS execs for the past 2 days, most are contemplating whether they're even going to implement it. Coming soon policies are widely different. Some of them allow you to do no show or show. Some of them allow public market. It's kind of a mess. But the reality is, I think NAR is taking a position, which, to be clear, I understand why. I don't think you're going to see NAR take much of a governance policy approach in the future. They're getting themselves out of that based upon the decisions they're making. They don't want to accept the liability. Granted, they have a $418 million payout they have to deal with. They've got dwindling membership and certainly budget problems they're going to deal with in the future. So I get it, but it does make it convoluted when you've got MLSs that are bordering and then they have different policies, and then how do you as a company, yeah, I mean, it's going to get messy.
on that note, Emily, before I go to you, Kevin, the vow thing we talked about yesterday was news to me, and I know what a vow is. And for people who don't, it's a virtual office website. Can you explain the whole thing with the vow that MLSs have to give a vow feed, and then that gives data basically, even though it says do not display?
There's a model vow policy. It exists because of a previous decree established by the Department of Justice and the FTC, which expired many years ago. There has not yet since been additional precedent related to vow. There's this complexity around this previous policy associated with the Department of Justice precedent, there not being any more precedent, and now the stakes are very high around how we all interpret vow because of the way that it interacts with this new demo requirement. So you can delay the input of the listing, but the listing has to be available to all participants. It can be available in the feed. Is it also available for display on the vow or not? Decision point.
Wait, but let's, forgive me, but dumb it down for people or make it more clear. You put the listing in, you mark it as a demo, it goes out, it's still available for IDX and VOW. VOW means that okay, say VOW, it's still available via VOW, right? Sorry, keep me honest here, please.
Yep.
And then it goes to ABC Brokerage's website.
Or Zillow.
I know, because
I just want to be clear.
And that's the consumer.
Is that not why some of these brokerages and franchises feel that they are not in control, whatever the reasoning is? Is it not empowering their argument to create a PLN that is truly not available to their competitors for whatever reasons they choose?
I mean, I'm not going to suppose to speak on the intention of any one brokerage or business model. I don't think
Of
that's
course not. No, nor should we.
But what I'll say is that what I know is that there is consumer sensitivity to that requirement sometimes that the listing be available for display on VOW, which maybe they could understand if it was available in a traditional brokerage sense, but it's not always. It's also available on these very large outlets for these listings because of the way that VOW has been used by a number of different folks in the industry. We have not necessarily evolved these very critical base policies that govern the way that we operate as MLSs. VOW, what it means to be a participant in the MLS, what it means to be a subscriber. I would have maybe preferred the work that we do as an industry be focused on those critical guardrails as opposed to being in this match on this one policy that has all these other things associated with it that we're not talking about. I think it's a miss for us that we're not talking about maybe more of these critical guardrails, the infrastructure of the MLS, and the way that has evolved because of the way the internet has evolved, because of the lapse of the decree, because of perhaps could there be new interpretation by the Department of Justice or others, we're foregoing the important part of a conversation.
So let me turn to Kevin, and this really does bring in the portals. And then next, for the last part, I want to talk about what this means to the consumer. But for the portals specifically, I do think it is about power. And I do think when any one of us says that we're not going to display listings for whatever reasons, I think it's problematic. If you're not comfortable, it's okay. But what do you think about the roles of the portals in this conversation? Because they're not agnostic either. Again, I'm sorry, but this is also about greed for everybody, not just one.
I'm not comfortable with it, but I'm going to say one thing here. The interesting thing is right now within most MLS systems, there's a flag that you can say internet yes or no, whether that's displayed or not. And so you can say no, and then that doesn't go anywhere. So that's where I go back to the technology is there to service. That gets back to what Emily's talking about, is creating those guardrails to make it easy. The one thing that's been there for as long as I've known, for a long time, internet yes, no. I can sit there and say no, and it's on the MLS. An agent has access to it. The broker has access to it. It's not being publicly displayed.
Go for
The
it.
thing that and by the way, I'm actually in agreement with Emily on a lot of this stuff. And just for context, I'm not in black and white on this. My problem with this whole discussion, I'll give you this example, two of them. Number one is my company has represented over, I don't even know, 100,000 transactions over the past 7 years. Do you know how many times as the CEO that I've had a seller send me a complaint about being on the MLS or being on public portals? Do you have any how many I've actually had complaints about it? Zero. I've got complaints about every other thing possible. Bad agents, lack of disclosure, blah, 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 blah. Not once has a seller ever said, my agents suck because they put it on the MLS and gave me maximum exposure on the internet.
Not for the address either.
Because that option already exists. There's already ways to do privacy. This isn't a new conversation. Like, and Kevin just made the point. You don't want it displayed online, turn it off. These people, sellers, do this 2 to 3 times in their life. And they do it so infrequently that they pay realtors a significant amount of money to advise them in a transaction that they are scared. They don't know what they're doing. They don't understand the paperwork. They don't know what they're doing because it's so freaking complex and they're going to spend their life savings on it. They are trusting that agent is doing their fiduciary responsibility of advising them. And this is the key thing I want to make a point of. Giving them all their options with the truth and the understanding and the clarity of everything, and then letting them make their choice. My problem is that is not what is happening here. And so you can see there's an article right on front of Real Estate News. Majority of people who sold their homes off MLS regret it because they figure out later that they could have made more money or done something differently. We talk about informed consent. Well, let me give you a statistic that'll blow your mind. 90% of American consumers don't read a single legal document that they sign. When was the last time anybody, including anybody on this webinar, read the terms of use on a website before you hit I agree? No one does. So you can create the most amazing informed consent that outlines every single risk, which, by the way, the lack of clarity from NAR on what really needs to be in that, like the real guardrails, as Emily just used, is ridiculous because you could have anybody interpret whatever form they want for informed consent, and it can be completely manipulative, which I've seen brokerages doing. But the reality is the customer is just, they don't know. That's what they're paying us for. And so when you are advising somebody and they're not getting the full scope, they're not getting the full understanding of what the value of the MLS is and why, even with the potential risks of what she's referring to her state, and we're not educating people correctly enough, then what's going to happen is they're going to make the decisions based upon the information they've been given. And then there's going to be regrets. And to be clear, and you know me, Audrey, I have spent time with class action litigators. I did 30 days ago. I showed them what was going on, and here's the words they said. These are going to be easy cases for us to win because you can show how deals are being double-ended, how there's a pattern, what is the disclosures being given to consumers, what is the potential downside. The only reason you're not seeing litigation yet is because in class action, they need a class. In other words, time of enough people to make the suit big enough to do it. And so what my main concern is, I want to see consumers, if they have all the information they need, And we as an industry have done it correctly, to Emily's comment. The guardrails, very clear understanding of what it is. And I believe that needs to be a common set of rules that everybody abides by, so that that disclosure is very clearly informed. And if the seller decides they want to do things, I am just as much of an American in freedom as anybody else. But none of that is happening. And that's the problem. You can look at two brokerages as an example, EXP and Compass. I'm using both as an example. Two different forms that are both public, very different approaches to informed consent. So
yeah, because EXP I think has a PLN as well. Right? James, I was prepping and I was reading the CNN article that was highlighted a woman, and she was with Compass, and she had said if she bought the house, she did it exclusive. Look, we're all going to be honest. If you can not have to show your house, not have to have an open house, not have to pay a massive staging fee. My friend was paying $4,000 a month for a staging fee on an apartment we're selling for $500-$600, ridiculous. So yeah, if you can do it, you don't have to clean it, you don't have to show it, you don't have to stage it, right? Yes, you might take less money, James. You might. Okay, you might do. It's an opportunity cost, right? So she said she did it. She sold it private. She said that it fell through. She ended up going on the MLS. She did make more money on the MLS. But at the end of the article, if you read all the way to the bottom, they said, would you do it again? And she said, yes. So at the end, she says, I would do it again, but I would use the PLN to see what was out there, and then I would put it in the MLS to potentially get the most money. So
she also said I would not take any offers or accept any offers in the private listing status until it was on the MLS.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. But the question is, does the PLN exist to have met her needs in its capacity? Emily, I would go back to the consumer and say, are we misleading consumers?
The consumer's not thinking about this in the way that we are, because we're all in it for our own businesses. Ultimately we've all tried to kind of wear the shield of the consumer. And at the end of the day, what I could say about the consumer in Austin, Texas is that concept of potentially testing the market or floating the balloon to see what works, very real here. We had a 31% appreciation in value in 2021 alone. Our market significantly rose in COVID and post-COVID. Getting a seller to recognize that the eggs did not hatch in that basket and that they do not have the value that they had 2 years ago is a constant and uphill battle for many agents with their sellers right now.
Yeah,
and the concept of I'm going to just throw something out there and see if I can get my dream number because I'm sitting on a 2.85% interest rate and I'm not that motivated to move is a very real thing here. And I do think that there's a place for that kind of, I don't want to be really listed. I'm not ready to be active in that way. I'm not motivated in that way right now because I'm going to see if I can get my dream price for this property. Absolutely. And that's a market condition which will shift as the market moves. Just as in 2021, I struggled with off-market property because there were 25 people circled around the block just waiting to look at the one property that was for sale. Those dynamics will shift, but I think when we're talking about a consumer, they don't know what CCP is. They don't know what a private listing network is. They don't know what VOW is. They don't give a shit what IDX is, but they're very much trying to navigate a market that has moved very, very quickly here and trying to find their way forward depending on what their motivations and needs are.
Perfect. So you agree that the information, that there needs to be much more clarity in providing consumers transparency into all of these things so they can make that.
You and I absolutely agree that when it's in the MLS, when the days on market exist, when the price drops exist, that is helpful to the agent. But there's also the seller that says, I don't want to do that yet. I don't want to necessarily incur that ding just yet. I want to see if I can get my dream price. And that's a reality too, that a seller thinks in their mind that there's still this potential that someone who doesn't know better, who's not paying attention, who's not well represented potentially, that's a disservice, but it's reality.
Can I ask a question then? Just because, and Audrey, I'm not trying to take this, but it's a valid question because every MLS has a different, I shouldn't say every MLS, most MLSs have a different policy for PLNs. For example, in MRED, Rebecca Jensen and I were chatting about this. Their requirement, which I agree with, is that an office exclusive in their private listing network is everybody puts it into the MLS, period. You don't get to have your own, basically. If you're going to keep it off, you have to put it in the MLS so everybody in the MLS has access to it. So there isn't I'm holding inventory and you can only get it if you work at my brokerage conversation.
But are those listings also available for display on the internet in VOW? And then can the VOW aggregate that data, still establish what the days on market are, still establish when there's been a price drop, and still potentially ding the listing because it's for display?
I get it, but my question is, this is what I'm getting at, is there's so many variances in these policies. The one thing I did, my point to this conversation was, is that the MLS requires it so that everybody's putting it in there. So there isn't a separation of company. If you're a member of the MLS, members of the MLS will be able to see that.
You and I agree on that all day. I just think there's context to it that we've been forced into because of these other guardrails that we've left undone.
That's exactly right. Yeah, uniform policies are great, except if there's a little lovely loophole like that. And this industry is full of them. And the MLSs have issues with their data with regard to current policy loopholes, to say the least. And again, this is about power. And there's two things happening. One, portals need as many listings as possible, period, end of conversation. And so do brokers, for the record, hence data sharing. Two, the other reality is that there are ways to solve this. And Kevin, I'm going to point to you. I know you raised your hand, you've not spoken, but the question I have for you, Kevin, as we pivot a bit is, are the systems in place to solve for this where we don't have to be worrying about a loophole with a VOW? Like, for instance, there are CRMs that provide the ability for brokerages to share. The second thing I want to talk about is policing, terms of policing display. So before I let you address policing display, James, I'm going to go to Kevin and talk about technology solutions.
From a technology standpoint, when people say they're putting it into the MLS, they think of the MLS as publicly displayed. And so I said, put it into the database. The MLS provides the rules. And so when you put it into the database, you can create rules of who has access to that. So whether or not they're part of a private listing network or an office exclusive, etc., only those people would have access to that. And the same thing, Audrey, of what you're using as an example for a large brokerage, they can still put and if they only wanted it for their office, the MLS, who owns the database, has the ability to give that broker feed directly back to that brokerage. It goes into their CRM, and those listings are only being displayed there.
You mentioned something yesterday that Matrix is doing that I did not know, which is that you can put a listing in and segment the permission visibility. I did not know that until yesterday.
Everybody can put everything into the database. That's why I don't say the MLS. You can put everything into the database based upon whatever the MLS makes of the rules of who has access to that data and can see that data. Whether or not, as I said, at the very base level that everybody understands internet, yes or no, we can do that. It's not publicly displayed. It's inside the database for agents and brokers to be able to access. Is it office exclusive? We can actually have, if you're part of that office, you can see it. If James is not part of that office, he can't see it. We can do that from a technology standpoint. The good news is everything remains in that database. So as Emily's talking about, days on market's important. Being able to have the history, being able to have access to all of that property intelligence so that provides that for the agent and the broker to give to that consumer, as James is talking about, that wants their hand held during that transaction that they only make 3 or 4 times in their lifetime.
Yeah. No,
but
that's
I
perfect.
love how simple Kevin makes that sound, when in fact there's a whole host of potential litigation around the decision points we make as an MLS about what happens to the listings in that database. And Cotality is my partner. They have been wonderful partners to us. We launched all the newest tech this year, and we're thankful for that. But it is not that simple at the MLS level because we hold the bag on the risk. We have to make the decisions about the guardrails.
And that's why I said the database and technology is one thing, but the MLS is the one that creates those rules and guardrails that we all have to adhere to. And so 100%.
Yeah. So look, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is risk. This is this conflict between what James is mentioning, which is the risk to the consumer. And I love the way you said it, Emily. We are all wearing the consumer shield. We're all out for the consumer until it hurts us. There is this level of risk and a question of, what do we do when the risk of the consumer is at complete odds with the risk of the corporate entity? And that was true with the compensation. It's better for the consumer to have probably known both sides of the compensation, but it was also not clear to most consumers that they didn't have to pay a buyer's agent. I do think the risk of the entity is at odds with the risk of the consumer. Don't know how much we really want the consumer to understand.
I say this lovingly to my industry, but 95% of them don't know 90% of the features of the MLS. Oh, seller privacy. The address is displayed. I'm like, that has been a function to turn off for as long as I can think of. There's all an interest. I mean, James, you're being naive. Zillow wants all the listings. Duh. So does every other broker who has a website through IDX. Duh. We get that. If we really want to have a conversation about the consumer, then we really need to sit down and actually go, what are the risks? All of them. What are those specific issues that we're going to face? It's not hard to do it. I pay my law firm to do an analysis and go, what are the legal risks? And they go, here's, priority to the other. It's not hard to figure out. And we sit there and we go, if we genuinely want to put the consumer as the North Star, it's not actually that hard to do. It means that we need to make business decisions around what is in the best interest of them. Associations are about protecting their members and their membership numbers. MLSs serve their members. I get it. I'm a franchise. I serve my brokers and agents too. I get it. There's no criticism here. But if we genuinely want to limit risk, then we need to sit down and go, what are the things that we need to address from a consumer perspective? And by the way, to Emily's comment, it might vary by area. There may be specific needs in certain parts of Texas or states that are different. It's just there are business interests that conflict with it under the guise of consumer protection, when in reality, we all know that there are things happening that are not in the best interest of consumers. And so I know people say everybody has an interest. My interest has been from day one about actually making sure the consumer is protected in this. And it's because I've seen historically, my family has been in real estate since I am a beneficiary, Audrey, of a system prior to what it is today, where large companies hoarded inventory, double-ended deals before they shared with their competitors. As my grandfather will tell you how he made all of his money. So we've moved away from that. It doesn't mean there aren't issues that we have to figure out, but we are having really tough conversations around. I think my colleagues will agree with me on this. We're having these really big discussions around a tiny percentage of sellers that need a specific use case, when a majority of them don't fall into this camp. Now, that majority number can be 51, 75, 89, whatever the number is, but a majority of sellers just want to get their house sold as quickly as possible for the highest price possible. That has not changed that I've seen anywhere across every market that I serve across the United States.
I would say probably more quickly than they care about the price.
It is very much about both speed, and speed comes from typically a majority of the time exposing it to the greatest number of potential buyers who can write an offer and move the property quickly. By the way, Sierra MLS just came out yesterday. You should look at this data. Sierra MLS just did one of the largest MLS in the United States. Did one of the studies, and they're showing right now that off MLS deals take about 20 days longer to sell. Most of them don't sell that way. They have to go back on the MLS, like a mass majority of them, in the largest state and largest MLS in the US. Very, very good data in there. So we're having such a strong debate about a small percentage of sellers.
If we just overcomplicated something that's always been around, we all agree there should be a road through for this. We all agree brokers should be able to serve their customers in the ways that they see fit. But this is a very, forgive me, but incestuous industry. MLSs are owned by brokers. Brokers are owned in effect by agents. There's no way to disentangle our participation with one another. I think last question, is this really just a factor of the two things? And I'll come back around. I don't mean to keep repeating the same question, but I keep sticking in my head. We have lower inventory than we've had in like 4 or 5 years or something, where,
we have lower inventory than we were in 2008.
Yes.
Inventory than I've ever had. That therein lies the difference.
Okay.
Nationally, yes. Emily's fair with that. Okay. Nationally.
Emily is in Austin.
I finally got a house to sell over here.
Okay. Emily's in Austin. We're just gonna, now don't make me sorry I had you on. Emily's in Austin.
But that is the reality, Audrey. Real estate is not equal everywhere. It is not all the same.
Yeah. But we still have to make, so again, in the interest of uniform conversation to the whole country, and I appreciate it, but wait a minute, is two things really driving this? Lower inventory in everywhere but Austin, and two is also the compensation rules changes. So because we're not displaying compensation the same way we were before, and because in a lot of areas there's lower inventory, are we really looking at a problem because brokers do want to double end it more, right? Because they're losing money 10 different ways from Tuesday, let's face it, to some degree. So, Emily, because you you go first, and then we'll go around the horn and call it a day.
We had the total opposite. We had the lowest inventory we'd ever had, literally. So I can speak to both ends of the market. And
Good.
houses were selling so fast and efficiently because everybody and their mother wanted one and there were none to be had. And
True.
Austin is desirable.
That's true.
We are open for business, by the way. That then we had a problem with pocket listings in a whole other perspective, from a whole other place, because I could sell it. I did not need necessarily the amplifier that the MLS was. There were 20 people literally around the block waiting to see the property on any given day. So I don't know that this is an inventory issue. I don't know that it's a compensation issue. I think it is definitely a cooperation issue. I think it is certainly a question of what is at the center of these MLSs. You talked about how entangled we are. That is also one of our greatest benefits, is that we have worked together in a way to make two sides of a deal happen and make an MLS marketplace exist, which I think James and I could both agree is the envy of the world. So I think we're having an identity crisis about what it means to cooperate at this point.
I do think there's no perfect world. I've been through, I don't know how many recessions. I am older than you. And there is no perfect world. You're right. Like, it's always funny for vendors, Kevin and I, when we're selling software, when the market's hot, everybody doesn't think they need it, or there's a million startups and you're competing. The market's down. Nobody has any money. They're cutting, right? So there's no perfect world. There just isn't. And so I hear you on that. I do think that's an interesting perspective too, about the fact that what us being intertwined makes us more powerful and not necessarily weaker. Kevin, anything else you want to say?
I'll let James have the last one because as a vendor, I don't have that, but as a former broker, and just would say to Emily's point, James mentioned statistics from California where the average price is quite a bit higher than the rest of the United States. And so you have middle America. Everybody always forgets about middle America, where the average home prices are below. They want to save every penny, and being able to have that on an open market and being able to have that exposure is a key piece. And so real estate's local. And so we got to think about that as a local.
Before I go to James, thank you for real estate being local. Now there's my unabashed plug. We are local data. We participate with almost everybody in this call in one form or another, especially Cotality, who's a very valued partner of ours. But I do think as we get more local and as we look at this issue, there are more avenues to see these listings, whether we like it or not. Please make sure that you give the consumer as much information as possible, because that's what we do. James, any last words on this?
Well, just to answer your question, that this comes from brokerage profitability. Certainly there is a few companies who are trying to create a shareholder return. And so they're trying to squeeze as much juice out of that orange as humanly possible. That's capitalism. I'm not going to say it otherwise, but that's where this really stems from. If you look at most real estate companies, I can't think of any other than like one, isn't making a big deal out of this and hasn't for as long as possible. People are playing in the same sandbox, to Emily's comment, cooperating to get deals done together, understanding supply and demand economics in general. And I think that's part of it. I don't agree that I think the cooperative compensation piece is part of that. Candidly, the process of it, I'm probably know more about this than most, since I've been both sued and settled and have been talking about this for 2 years. And I have a big national footprint.
That award.
Well, I mean, look, I'm not saying I want to win it, but I'm in 630 real estate offices. I see the national marketplace and understand real estate transactions. That's not really the issue, because sellers are pretty well informed that their house appreciated 100% over the past 8 years. Buyers can't afford to pay their agent. And if a deal is going to come together, you're going to have to come up and make it work. So that's why 90% of the transactions still do that. I don't think that's the issue. We have too many damn realtors. I say that lovingly. And we have 4 million transactions. It's been that way for several years. People have used their savings accounts. Brokerages have made massive cuts. It's all about the P&L and bottom line and trying to figure out how to make it work and get through it. That's fundamentally what this is basically economics.
I do think the players in the industry are changing. We saw Rocket make some big moves. We have CoStar, that's a very big player in the market, was largely CRE 5 years ago. And I do think it's upending the resi side a bit. There's a lot more institutional money in resi than there used to be. In terms of institutional investors. At one time, this was maybe at the height, there was 12 to 15% of homes were owned by institutional investors. Nobody really talks about SFR a lot. I know a lot about SFR. Most people don't even know what it means. The SFR conference is twice a year and is incredibly busy with companies like Invitation Homes and Stanley Martin. I think that, there's a lot at play here. I would also argue, James, that some of the brokers that are staying quiet and doing business are also using their CRMs, or and and going other ways, like they're finding ways to skin the cat. But again, does it really make a difference? My comment at the end of this, does it really make a difference? Are we still serving 5%, 10%, 1%, less than 1% of the industry in the same way we always have? So, all right, thank you guys. I'm going to go around. Kevin, thank you. I appreciate it. It's your first time. I really appreciate it. Emily, coming in last minute. Love you. Thank you. So smart, so interesting. I think we'll keep an eye on the MLSs and how the MLSs, work with companies like Cotality to skin this cat. James, always, I love having you. Thank you. I know your time is extremely valuable, as it is all of us, but I appreciate it. I do think it is about awareness for the consumer. I do think we've created a bit of a mess for whatever reasons. And it's going to be harder for consumers to make these decisions in a way that they really understand and it is beneficial to them. Maybe the fact that we're having these conversations more audibly will force us to serve the consumer better.
Hope so.
Yeah, me too. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's all, folks. All right. See you later. Bye-bye.